So that completes a section which I didn't finish in Phoenix from before, okay, from up above. Why did I say that? Because he's about to quote Nagarjuna, okay, Arya Nagarjuna, who was brought to us by Master Chandrakirti, okay? Like, I don't know, to put it in 1960s terms, Master Chandrakirti is Ed Sullivan. And Nagarjuna is the Beatles. Okay? All right. Somebody asked me who the Beatles were the other day. I felt really bad. Okay. So Arya Nagarjuna said, where was that? Here he goes. Nera lemba mato pe dakya mayan chepetse nera leni dakyena kyaki dagni mepayin shesum batar. This is one of those Nagarjunian incomprehensible verses, and I'll give it to you incomprehensibly. Nera lemba mato pe. If there were no self that were not the parts of Nick, if there were no Nick that were the parts of Nick, did I get that right? Yeah. Sorry. There's no Nick who is exclusive of his parts. How's that? There's no Nick which is exclusive of his parts. In Tibetan, the word parts here is Nera lemba. Nera lemba means that which was taken on. And it always refers to the parts that you took on when you were born. Your body and mind that you assumed when you were born. Okay? So if there were no body and mind which Nick assumed upon his birth, then let's say there's no Nick which is separate from the parts he took on when he was born. Okay? Let's say there is no such thing. Nera leni dakyena, then the guy would have to be his parts. All right? Then the guy would have to be the parts he took on. Kyaki dagni mepayin. If it's true that he is just the parts he took on, then he's not Nick. Because Nick's the whole thing. Right? Okay? Okay, here we go. Now he's going to try to clarify. Nera lem je pumbonga le shembe nera lembe dak me par gyurwe kin. You took on a certain body and mind when you were born. Is there a person who took them on? No, it's a question. The word for your body and mind in Tibetan and in Sanskrit is that which was taken on at your birth. But who took them on? Okay. All right. See, I took a rebirth, right? Who took? You are the rebirth. Okay? I took on parts when I was born. I took on a body and mind when I was born. What do you mean, I? You were the body and mind. You are the body and mind. Okay, then it's we. You see, they're just trying to point out that there's a fundamental mistake in how we think. And by the way, I like to say, although people don't like to hear it, it's reflected in the use of language itself. Our languages are defective. You can't express in our languages, or any language in the world, you can't express truth. Because those languages are a reflection of a mind which was always making a mistake. Those languages themselves are mistaken. The use of you and me is a contradiction. There's no such thing as you and me. But we have those words. And we can't actually think or express ourselves differently. It's very difficult when your words themselves are defective. Your language is defective. But that's another story. Okay. Nirnami Pabongka Rinpoche Kinda. Derma say, not only that, Jupale. What's Jupa? There's two famous Jupas, Umala Jupa and Chipalan Jupa. So which one would he probably talking about here? Yeah, the Umala Jupa, okay? Majjhimika Avatar, Majjhimaka Avatar. Entering the middle way. Written by Master Chandrakirti. Okay? So he's right away he's jumping to Master Chandrakirti. So you can think of our whole emptiness lineage as Buddha, Arya Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Tsongkapa, us. Okay? Dharma say Jupale. Lembo rang nierlen chik rig mumin. Detana le chepo chik ni gyur. It would be a contradiction to say that Nick had taken on Nick. Okay? It would be a contradiction to say that Nick had taken on Nick at his birth. Detana, if that were the case, then the agent of an action and the action itself, or the agent of an action and the object of that action would be the same person. The taker and what was taken would be the same person, and that's a contradiction. You can't reach out and take yourself because you're the reacher. Okay, it's not possible. Okay, detana echipo chignigyor she sumbatar never langja dang never lempa po chitigyon kinchum. If Nick, what he's basically saying is that if Nick were the sum of his parts, okay. If he were just one, okay? If we could see Nick without checking out his parts, you see? If he were just one, then Nera Langja Dang Nera Lempa Po would become the same thing. The one who took his birth and the birth that was taken would be the same, which is a contradiction. There has to be a taker before you have to take something that he took. Okay? You can't. One has to precede the other. Okay? And Lu Dang Lu Chen. The body and the one who possesses the body would have to be the same thing, right? Nick's body and Nick would have to be the same thing. But then you couldn't say Nick Sa, because Nick Sa means he's different from the body. You know, John's book, Ben's pen. You know, they're different stuff. That's why Ben can have a pen, because he's not the pen. Okay? So the minute you say Nick's body, it means Nick is different from his body. But Nick's not different from his body, because if you took away the body, you wouldn't have a Nick. Okay. Yenla Dang, Yenla Chen. The limbs of the body in Tibet, they consider 5, which are arms, legs, and head. Okay? And the person who possesses those limbs, okay? Can you say my head, my arm, my feet? You say it, right? Then, but are you separate from those? You're not separate from those. So basically when you say my head, you're saying head's head. Or you're saying my. And they're both crazy, okay? And it's not just a game, okay? We're not just playing a game. It's not just, what do you call it? Sophistry. It's not just like word games. It's that your perceptions are screwy, and it's reflected in the words you use in all of your languages on your planet. Okay? You say Nick's body, but Nick can't exist without the body. Nick has to be, in a sense, the body, and so he can't be. You can't say body's body, and you can't say Nick's Nick. Because then they'd be separate. And Nick isn't separate from Nick. Nick is just one. Nick's not plural. We already said that. Okay? If your language is screwy, that means your thinking is screwy. Okay? And that's why aspirin doesn't work on your planet. Okay. Chik tu gyurwe kenchu. Derma set dak pumbo dang chik yina jupale. So suppose Nick is his body and mind. All right. Then now we got to Jukpale. the same text, Master Chandrakirti's text, says, Kyote Pumbo Dagni Dechir De Mangwe Daktan Mangwe Dak Te Dakyan Mambor Gyur. That's not a big deal. Are Nick's parts Nick? Is Nick's leg Nick? Can you have a Nick without legs, arms, and head? I mean, technically, I guess you could. But there was that movie. But now you're going to spend all night trying to figure out which movie. Can't have a Nick without the basic parts of a Nick. Okay? But if Nick is his basic parts, then there's lots of Nicks. Because there's lots of parts. Okay? If Nick is his body and mind, then he's already two. There's already two Nicks going on. Okay? If he's not his body and mind, then where else is he? Okay? There's just a basic fundamental problem with everything. There are 5 parts to the classical parts to a person, and then there would have to be 5 Nicks. Because if he's his parts, if Nick is his parts. If he's not his parts, then what is he? Is somebody else's parts? Okay. Yang na dak chik le me patar pumbo yang ngar miteching chik to tower kyun. If you go the opposite way, okay? If you say, look, Nick's not plural, Nick's not 5 Nicks, or 2 Nicks, there's only 1 Nick. Well, then he should only have 1 part. Because that's who Nick is. Okay? You're screwed up either way. If you say Nick is all his parts, then there's 5 Nicks running around. If you say, no, Nick is only 1, well, then he only has 1 part. But he doesn't only have 1 part, because he's got at least body and mind, that's 2. Got it? If it's confusing, you got it. Okay. Dark Pumbo Ngai Yin Shindu, Mai Ngeldu Ningsam Jorwa Dun Mepik Kin. So he's listing problems with what it would be to say there's a Nick who owns his parts, his body and mind. Okay? If you say there's a Nick who owns his body and mind, if you say there's a Nick who took on a body and mind when he was born, which is to say there's a separate Nick from his body and mind, because he had to be there already to take them on, okay? Then there's all these problems pop up. He's just listing problems randomly, okay? Here's another problem. Then it would have been meaningless to come into your mother's womb, because he was already Nick. Okay. If Nick took on a body and mind when he was born, then there's no reason for the body and mind to develop in the mother's womb, because Nick took them on. So there must have been enough to Nick already without the body and mind that was produced in the womb. Okay? All right. Young, are we out of time? We still have a few minutes. Okay. By the way, I was late because I was doing some service for my teacher, and that's the way it should be. Okay, that's most important. Do you remember Connecticut? Who was there? They bought a tent. They put all the chairs out. A couple hundred people were coming. And then my Lama gave me a job that weekend. He said, you have to do it this weekend. And I just canceled it. And there were like a couple hundred people sitting there in the tent waiting. So you're lucky. All right. I never went. Then there was the backlash from that. Was pretty funny. Okay. The lady who paid for the tent took me into a room, and that was a long story. But she was quite big. And she took me into the room and slammed the door. And then all my students were waiting. And then she sat down on the couch, but she fell off because she was so mad she missed the couch. And then, you know who. And then there was a huge crash. And they thought that she had thrown me through the window. And they all rushed in, And she sprawled on the ground. Okay. Anyway, these are passing into myths. It's true. That was pretty funny. Yang na ludang no rashimi chikina shiwi up to lu mer segment tawa gyurat say na yang mer segment tawa gyurakin. So if Nick is his body, okay? If he is his body, if Nick is his body, then when a person dies, you burn the body, right? And the body becomes bhasma. It becomes powder. And then, in that case, I would also have to become powder. Nick would become powder. The Nick who took birth and took on the body would also be pulverized. Okay? But you don't say that. You don't say we burned the body and Nick got pulverized. Okay? Alright. Then I say, not only that, na kela chima ninsam jorwa shindulu kyang ninsam jorwa gyurwa am. Who takes rebirth? I mean, let's take it from the other angle. Let's take it from the death, going on. Who crosses over? Ningsam Jorwa, those of you who want to become translators, okay? Ningsam Jorwa, a very weird phrase, means who crosses over. Okay? So who is it that crosses over? Did you ever think about it? I mean, how much crosses over? Because that must be the real you, in a way, right? Who crosses over? If Nick is his body and mind, there's no one to cross over because the body and mind were left behind. Okay? Who crosses over? Okay? Ningtam Jorwa say Shendu Luk Sam Jorwa Shindu Luk Kyang Ningtam Jorwa Gyurwam. If Nick were his body, okay? We're still trying to figure this out. Is he his body or is he the possessor of his body? Because neither one works. If he's his body, all these problems pop up. If he's not his body, then who the hell is he? I mean, where is he? Okay? Alright? Because he can't be there without his body. Okay? Here we go. So if you were your body, then when you died, who takes the next birth? Who crosses over? The body is destroyed. The body is gone. If Nick is his body, then where's Nick after he dies? Who crosses on to the next birth? Because the body's left behind. And then, these are not compelling arguments to people who grew up in a culture that doesn't believe in rebirth anyway. Okay? But that's another story. Gurwam, Yangna Ludan Chima Ningsam Jorwa Jorgyu Mepa Ta Nayang Ningsam Jorgyu Mepe Kin. In that case, since the body can't cross over, then neither could Nick. Okay? Alright? Kin. Dak Sugme Kam Sukewa Misipe Kin. And if Nick is his body, then is it the case that there are no beings who don't have bodies? And we posit people who live in the formless realm. Okay, we say there are people who are almost bodiless. They're just minds. They're just, disconnected minds. There are places where people live just as mental. They have very subtle prana bodies. But basically they are not physical. They are just consciousness. They are just beings of consciousness. They don't have a physical body and they don't live in a physical place. Okay? So if Nick were his body, then he couldn't take birth there. Because there wouldn't be anything left. Okay. But you don't believe all that anyway. Dak Pembo Mayimbe Kyun Che Chung. Dak Pembo Yimbe Kyun Che Chung. There would also be the problem of saying that Nick were made of atoms. Pembo means molecular substance. Stuff that is made of molecules or atoms. Is Nick made of atoms? Is Nick made of atoms? You can go like this, or you can go like this. You're doing pretty good for having colds and all that. Not so many colds as earlier. Could Nick be molecular matter? No, because he has to possess that matter. It's Nick's body. Nick is separate from the body. Or you couldn't say Nick's body. Okay? Are you telling me he's not separate from the body? Is he separate from his body or not? If he's not, you can't say Nick's body. If he is, then you're running around saying body's body. Or Nick's Nick. Okay? Either way, it's a problem. Right? Okay. Na semdan chikyena. So he just covered the problems of saying that Nick is his body. Now let's see what happens if you say Nick is his mind. Semdan chikyena. Sem la kyak tok min jungwe. Na la kyak tok jung mi sipa. What's kyak? And how does it differ from kyak? I'll tell you another funny story. I like this story. I was in Tucson. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was teaching. And he has a friend of mine. He has an Oxford translator, a friend of mine. An old debate partner. And so he was translating for him. And His Holiness was talking about patience, And so somebody asked a question, someone keeps bugging me over and over again, what should I do? And His Holiness was like, go to them once and ask them not to do that, And then if they keep doing it, then go to them again and ask them politely not to do it, And then if they keep doing it, be a little more forceful and try to make it clear to them that you don't want to do it. And then if they keep doing it, tell them to kyakpa so, which means eat shit. And then the translator was like, and he's in front of like 5,000 people, and he goes through the whole thing, and then I'm waiting for the end, and His Holiness is waiting for the end, and he gets to the end and he says, express your extreme displeasure. So anyway, this is not that kyakpa. This is kyakpa, which means ice, or to feel cold. People who don't learn Tibetan carefully get into problems. You ask for a glass of water with ice, but you say the wrong word. Then you can get then this would be a good place with all those stopped up toilets. Okay. Anyway, if Nick's mind were Nick, then Nick could never say, I'm cold or I'm hungry. Okay? Because that can only the body can feel cold or hungry. Right? Not the mind. Misi, sadan te gong sok ki tse na kyak na tok she sawa mitepekin. And if you got cold or hot, or if you got hungry or thirsty, etc., it would become wrong to say, I feel cold, or I feel hungry. Okay? Because those are only detectable through the bodily senses. If Nick was limited to being his mind, then there's those problems. He couldn't say, I feel cold. Because the mind cannot detect cold without the body. All right? So look, we just gone through demonstrating that Nick is not Nick's body alone. And then we went through proving that Nick is not Nick's mind alone. So what would be the next thing to disprove? Yeah, Nick is not the combination of his body and mind, which is the more difficult one. Okay, here we go. Na lu sem ni dang chikyena, nge lu dang, nge sem she, keshi keche sosar zimbe dume bekin. If you are your body and mind together, then what sense would it make to ever say, my body or my mind? Because then you're positing a person who's separate from them. Okay? if you are the combination of your body and mind, which you are, almost, it would be illogical to say my body and my mind, because then you would say the body of the body and mind, and the mind of the body and mind. Okay? It wouldn't make sense. You almost are your body and mind together. But one more thing has to happen, which is, there has to be a seed in your mind which forces you to see it that way. Okay? That is Shenyan. We'll do just a few minutes, okay? Shenya dak pung rangune dupe chikyena you do the and the block got broken. You do dang chatam chene chikushing. Moreover, if I were my parts, okay? If I were my parts, then if I were one thing, if I were the Nick who had the parts, because that's what we think, right? We say Nick's body, Nick's mind. So we think there's a Nick who's not the body and not the mind. He's the possessor of the body and the mind. Okay? If I were that, then I would always have to be one in all times and all places, okay? And in all ways. Then what does that mean? He quotes Arya Nagarjuna again. Kelte pumbo dagyena kedan jipa chendu gyor shesum batar pumbo kejik chepa jitawa shin dakyan kejik chepa gyorshin detana suki pumbo ngai chi chepe tsulki kejik chepa shin tu dakyan gyun chepe tsulki kejik chepa tawakyun. Kelte pumbo dakyan, this is Nagarjuna. Kelte pumbo dakyena, if Nick's parts were Nick, Kedan jipa chendu then it would also have to come in and out of existence. Who's it? Nick. Okay? If Nick is the parts of Nick, if Nick is his body and mind, then Nick also would have to come in and out of existence. There's a couple ways to read this. I'll tell you one and you can go to bed. Okay? Kenjik chepecha mitapitseni. Kenjik chepecha mitapitseni. The definition of a changing thing is that it goes through continual cycles of instantaneous destruction and recreation. Okay? All things that are changing, all the things basically around you are going in and out of existence in an instantaneous stream. They last for a second. Some texts say they don't even last. They're there for a second. They come into being in a millisecond. They last for a millisecond. They go out of being in a millisecond. Because they are results of karmic seeds. The seeds pop open. The seeds die. The thing stops. And then there's another seed that pops open. So you are a series of stills. Okay? You over 50 years, 60 years are a series of stills. You are frames in a movie. And each frame comes and each frame goes. All things are like that. Okay? All things are like that. Because they're coming from seeds. And the seeds only last for a moment, for a millisecond. And then those frames fly by at 65 per second. And then we were talking about, I don't know, to get video to work on YouTube without looking jerky, it has to be about that. So your life is flowing at exactly the right speed for you to think there is a time going on. Okay? It's just a bunch of stills, seeds going off, and you're having discrete impressions at the rate of 65 a second, and they give you the what's the word? The impression, but there's a better word. Anyway. The illusion. They give you the illusion of your life going on and passing through time. Okay? Because there are seeds coming. You're getting, actually it's only still photographs being laid in front of you at the speed of 65 a second. Is it, Jason? 65? It's around that. Not to look jerky. 100? Okay, IMAX, 65 a second. Anyway, that's good enough. He does that for a living. Okay, so it happens to be that the mind throws up discrete pictures at the rate of 65 a second. And that gives you the illusion of time passing and of the world moving. Okay? But it's not the world moving. It's just discrete pictures being thrown up in front of your mind at 65 a second. That's what your body consists of, and that's what your mind consists of. Nick's body and Nick's mind are just photos of his body is like this. No, really. And it's, you see? But 65, it's even like, you see? And then it gives you the illusion of movement. But in truth, those each still is coming in and out of existence. Okay, each frame is coming in and out of existence. Therefore, ergo, if Nick were his body, Nick would be coming in and out of existence constantly. That's all. If Nick were only his body, if there were no Nick beyond the body and mind, who owned the body and mind, there's all those problems, right? But one of the problems is that if Nick was his body and mind, Nick would be here and gone 65 times every second. And we know it's only 65 times every minute when the room is warm and he's tired. Okay? Like he's in and out. Okay? I'm just having fun, okay? All right? It's not the case that he disappears every 65th of a second. All right? If he were only his body, then he would. Nick would be in and out every 65th of a second. Okay? All right. Maybe we should stop there. This is hard, okay? That's why I read you that little paragraph up above that said, if you really want to get to the bottom of the stuff, you've got to crack some kappa. And it's not going to happen on the first time you hear it. Okay? You can boil it down to, in practice, right? I think it's important to do it in practice. In practice, you have to boil it down to recognize the Nick that's not there. And I think it's easiest to talk about the Nick who's not at fault that he was blamed for stealing the books in the Centennial Room. Okay? Right? The Nick who's not at fault, who was accused of stealing books. The Nick who wasn't at fault when he was accused of stealing books. That Nick, what? Never existed. Doesn't exist, couldn't exist. There's no such thing. All right? Just stay there. That's enough. Okay. That's a practical emptiness. Why? Because the next time you get accused of something you didn't do, or criticized by anyone who doesn't realize you're perfect, then you won't get so upset, okay? Because the person they're accusing doesn't exist. The person who was wrongly accused doesn't exist. So you don't have to get upset about it, because he's not there. You don't have to defend somebody who's not there. Okay? Then you save a lot of time and wear and tear on your body and mind. Okay? This whole thing of trying to defend a Nick who's not there consumes most of your life. So if you could get over that, you might find other interests. Right? Okay. Like golden rooms.
Sunam Geshe Sotsokshin, Sunam Geshe Rejure, Tamba Kunito Basho.
Okay, hang in there. You're doing good.